Good morning, Revolution, everybody, and welcome to our stream this morning. All of our friends on YouTube, X, and Facebook. Very happy to see you, be here with you. Hope to have a conversation with you. Please send in your comments. We will talk about them. Our producer will share them, and maybe we can talk a little bit, deepen our engagement. Hello, Rosanna and Aaron and Scott. Hope all of you
Morning.
are also
Morning.
doing well. We got a lot to talk about this morning. We're talking about the many versus the money. And there's a lot of big, big money. Ever since Citizens United in 2010, which opened up the door to dark money and light money and all different kinds of money, billions of dollars have been spent. I think I read an article this morning that said $1 billion in dark money alone was spent in 2020, and they expect for it to surpass that this year. $20 million spent to defeat Representative Bowman in New York, in Westchester County, in the most expensive House race in U.S. history. And it's likely that that's just the beginning, and we're going to come back to that in just a moment. And then we have the best court money can buy with the MAGA majority in the U.S. Supreme Court, and they've made some interesting and deeply troubling rulings over the past several days, several weeks. We're going to be talking about that. And then big developments in the European theater in the country of France, where the left won a very, very significant and, in the eyes of some, startling electoral victory. And we're going to be digging into that and to see whether or not it has any implications for the United States. And then lastly, our mailbag. So get ready for a thought provoking conversation. Let's start with the presidential debate the other week. We're going to start with a lightning round. You know, I like lightning rounds. Scott doesn't like them because his lightning answers are more like molasses, but we'll see what he does this. Um, After the debate a couple of weeks ago, has the fascist danger increased, uh, lessened, or stayed just about the same? Scott?
Uh, I'm going to say increased, but not. I would say less because of the debate itself than because of the way in which the media has approached the questions that were raised around it.
Okay. Rosanna, increased, lessened, or stayed about the same?
Um, I would say about the same. Although I think that it's great that people are now focused on the Project 2025. Their increase in it's like that's what they're combating the with the that media uh, that the media that Scott was referring to. Uh, they're combating with what Project 2025 really is, what it means for working people, and I think that that's a good focus. So I would say maybe there's definitely a struggle and a fight back and forth, but I think that kind of levels it off about the
Okay.
same.
Aaron,
Yeah, Joe,
increased?
I'd have to say that the fascist danger is probably increased. And the reason that I kind of say that is because this election is much, much bigger than these two personalities, right? They represent forces. You have Biden that represents the very liberal democratic forces right now, and you have Trump that represents the extreme right forces of monopoly capital. And so when you have these candidates on a debate stage together, and you have Trump, this mouthpiece for the most reactionary wing of the transnationals, telling Joe Biden, oh, I don't think you know what the F you're talking about, that's extremely worrying for pro-democracy forces in this country and for our ability to create that broad united front to block fascism.
I think that Aaron is right that it has increased. And the reason that it's increased is because the Democratic Party's presidential campaign is in complete disarray. I
Hmm.
mean, complete. And it's growing worse by the day. I mean, up until the debate, I was fairly confident that Trump would and the MAGA forces were going to get a butt whooping in November. But after that debate, you have politician after politician and personality after personality coming out and saying, Scott, that Biden should step away. And I can just see the ads, you know, in September and October, at quoting George Clooney and quoting Stephanopoulos and quoting this woman who's the heir to the Disney, fortune, uh, saying that in their own words, this guy can, and they don't appear to be able to resolve it. Let's have another lightning round. If the danger is greater, let's assume that if the danger is greater, what should be done about it? Should they change horses? Number one, or should folks move to Canada or Mexico? Or should we keep our nose to the ground, ignore all of this foolishness in the air, and keep organizing? Scott?
So I'm going to give a molasses answer, which is, one that's thick with substance, right? Um, so uh, what's interesting about all of these reports, oh, this big donor, that big donor, this, James Carville, or this consultant, that consultant, Stephanopoulos, whoever, says that Biden should step out. What you don't see in that is, the leader of uh, a labor union, for example, coming out and taking a position on this question. Or you don't hear leaders of like state and county Democratic parties coming out and taking positions. Like the people who are actually going to do the work of turning people out to vote are not in this discussion, right? So I kind of think that third option, we win. This is not about Trump versus Biden, like Aaron said. This is about democracy versus fascism. And we fight on the issues. We fight on, as Rosanna said, on the threat of Project 2025. And we mobilize and organize, and we try not to be distracted by this persistent sort of drone of ruling class voices trying to make it about the candidates rather than the issues and the people and the masses of people involved. That's it.
Rosanna, they focused on Biden's old age and fumbling and blank stares and inability to communicate well, while Trump lied for an hour and a half. Just lie after lie after lie after lie. And it went unchallenged. Um, so, what do? You change horses, get another candidate? Or do you move to Canada or Mexico? Or do we keep our nose to the ground and keep organizing on the issues?
Well, I think here we take a lesson from the French, and I know we're gonna talk about that in a little bit. But they continued. They were the I think the right wing was showed a lot of promise, or they thought they were going to win, but the people said no, you're not going to win, and so they mobilized and they went out and voted, and that's what we have to do. We still have the power as people, as working people. We still have the power to make change. We have to organize. So I say, let's keep our nose to the ground and keep moving. The you know the What was that saying? That fat lady hasn't sung yet.
Okay. And what's your opinion?
To be honest, Joe, I think the debates have kind of shown us that we cannot afford to rely on Biden if we are serious about preserving our democracy, if we're serious about preserving our working people's democratic rights. However, at the same time, right, like if we're serious about trying to push Biden out of the way, we have to think as people who are trying to be leaders in that struggle, how can we open up space for a truly like mass strategy to push Biden out of the way? And the only thing that I can really think of is running a candidate, somebody who's able to, kind of rally together all of these anti MAGA forces and give voice to the fact that Biden does not seem to be the most consistent fighter against MAGA right now. However, at the same time, right, because of the fact that such a candidate doesn't exist, the infrastructure for said campaign doesn't really exist, it's kind of an uphill battle. And so as a result, I kind of have to say, it seems like there's not really much else for us to do but keep our nose on the ground and kind of just continue to organize until there is that moment, right, where we can make that kind of progressive intervention that we need to make.
Scott, has the anti-MAGA, anti-fascist majority disappeared? Last year, the progressive and even centrist candidates whooped booty up and down the breadth and length of the country, particularly around the issue of abortion rights. Has that gone away?
Absolutely not. That's that's still here. The uh, the struggle of LGBTQ people for their equality and the fight back against the various attacks on their dignity and their rights has not disappeared. Um, the uh, the struggle for democracy broadly, I think, is ramping up. As Rosanna mentioned, we now see this new attention to Project 2025. Like social media is full of people saying, "Oh, Project 2025 says this on such and such a page. Do you agree with that?" It's really putting those issues out there. So I think no, the anti-MAGA majority has not disappeared, um, and it needs to mobilize. And we need to remember as well that it wasn't Biden that you know stopped fascism in its tracks in 2020. Um, it was essential workers who needed better protections on the job. It was people who needed unemployment insurance. It was people who needed the child tax credit. It was people who had been in the streets fighting for um, African American liberation and who understood that that another Trump presidency would be um, fatal to the cause of democracy. So this is, yeah, these forces are still there. Um, so all is not lost by any means.
All is not lost by any means. That election was won in Detroit, in Philadelphia, in Phoenix, in Atlanta, in Wisconsin, Madison, and Milwaukee, um, and in Nevada. What's the capital of Nevada? Las Vegas. That's where the election in 2020 was won. And Black and Latino workers played a huge role in that fight, which drove Trump crazy. And he had that press conference, and he basically blamed Black folk and Latinos for stealing. That's such a racist. That, don't get me started. Um, Aaron, you started off saying big money is playing an enormous role in this campaign, and APAC spent pledges to spend $100 million in this election cycle, and they targeted Mr. Bowman, Representative Bowman, and they spent $20 million in order to defeat him. Was that what brought him down? You worked a little bit in that campaign. What did you see, and why do you think he lost?
Yeah.
AOC didn't lose. You know, she defeated soundly her opposition.
Mhm.
So why do you think Mr. Bowman lost?
Yeah, to be honest with you, Joe, I think there are a few different reasons why Mr. Bowman lost that race. On the one hand, you do right have the fact that we're in this like new political situation right now because of the crisis that's happening in Gaza. And because of that, right, there is kind of the splintering effect that's kind of happened in the anti-MAGA coalition. We're not as united as we were previously because the question of Palestine, this issue of a permanent and lasting ceasefire, the issue of peace, has kind of broken up our coalition and kind of divided us a little bit. And so we're not able to come together and sort of like defeat the fascist danger as fiercely as we did in 2020, like you just said. And so, there's obviously that factor, that division, that disunity that is really holding us back and that could pave the way towards more defeats if we don't build the kind of unity that we need to meet the moment right now that we're in. But at the same time, like you mentioned, right, it's not an anomaly that APAC is spending millions upon millions of dollars to take out progressive elected officials who are coming out in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza. When I was talking to people on the ground, I think I was able to see firsthand the influence that big money in politics is able to buy in these elections. Um, Representative Jamaal Bowman, he previously used to be an educator, but he's always been a lifelong advocate for social justice, for economic justice, for multiracial democracy. And APAC was able to use $20 million, dollars, like you said, to entirely shift the narrative. When I was talking to people on the ground, people were telling me, oh, I don't know if I'll support Bowman this time around because he hasn't talked enough about the hostages, you know? So when we think about APAC and when we think about the role of big money in politics, we need to understand that when these forces come out and they spend millions upon millions of dollars to take out our people, this is an attack on democracy itself. And furthermore than that, because of the fact that APAC has spent $20 million dollars in this previous election, they know that that works, which is really bad for the progressive movement. And it's really bad for our working class movement that we're trying to build. If we want to build a ceasefire movement, a truly mass ceasefire movement, we need elected officials to know that they're not going to be putting a target on their back by speaking out in favor of these issues. And so there's this quote from this young woman who was affiliated with Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, who played a really big part in that campaign as well in trying to mobilize that progressive Jewish vote. Um, she says, and I quote, now we know how much it costs to buy an election. So that's the really concerning thing, I think, about APAC spending in this election cycle. But like you said, Joe, they've pledged to spend over 100 million to take out progressives who support a ceasefire. And like Scott said, the fight's not over. We were able to defend Summer Lee in Philly. We defended AOC. And, it's really sad that Representative Jamaal Bowman lost his race. But right now, people are gearing up to defend our sister, Cori Bush. So, there's really a lot of work that still needs to be done. And we have to remember that APAC wouldn't be spending this much money, that all of these big money interests, these pro war lobbies, they wouldn't be spending millions upon millions of dollars if they weren't scared.
Rosanna, one of the things that you know uh, you might pay attention to is that while the Israel issue is clearly an important issue in this campaign, and APAC spending is being highlighted, it's also drawing attention away from, at least so far, um, other section of big businesses spending on the campaign. You know, the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, big oil, the big military corporations, uh, and that old WASP money, white Anglo-Saxon old establishment money that is really the determining factor in any election. And so, is big money, in your opinion, Rosanna, going to determine what happens in this campaign? Is Bowman defeat a one-off, as Aaron was saying? AOC won, Summerhill and PA won by double digits. She blew her opponent out the box. Rashida Tlaib has no. There was another attempt to buy. I think APAC promised her opponent something like a million or 10 million. I forget how much money to run a game. Well-known actor in Michigan. He said, "No, I ain't for sale." Um, and then there's the Cori Bush campaign in St. Louis. In other words, do you think, Rosanna, that the members of the squad, the most progressive, are going to be able to push back this effort to defeat them?
Well, I think, it's really up to the people. They can spend all kinds of money on these campaigns, but it's the people that really make the determination. It's once again, it's organizing on the ground, getting the people to understand that, not to allow money to buy their vote, getting people to understand that they have to look deeper into the issues and into the candidates to really know who's going to really defend their best interests, and not just you know succumb to fear mongering or succumb to rumors or all these other kinds of things, but to be able to look at the whole picture. I know here in California, there's been several initiatives where big money has really come in to pass the initiative, but they failed. They completely failed. No matter how much money they spent, they completely failed, and that was because people were much more in tune as to what that initiative meant for them and their lives. So I think it can be defeated. Once again, we have to unite, organize, and stay alert.
I remember during the election campaign for the mayor, you were really worried about that, Rosanna, because the mayor, the one of the Democratic candidates, was a big money guy who spent, his fortune trying to win that
Yeah,
election.
he has a ton of money, and he bought all kind, and he really tried to appeal to the Latino community, which the Latino community here in Los Angeles is huge, but he failed. But yeah, it was so yeah. Money doesn't always buy votes. Organizing is what is the key.
Scott, some of our listeners are saying today that redistricting, gerrymandering played a big role in the campaign. One said that uh, we it should be considered that Bowman's district was redistricted to include less black and brown voters from the Bronx, and included more upper income, middle class voters in Westchester County. Um, in your opinion, Scott, a one off or a trend? And what does that say about building broad, the need for organization and building broad electoral coalitions? We
Well, I
see
think
that there was a, go ahead.
the the redistricting certainly played a role. Even here in my district in New York, we've had two rounds of redistricting. The most recent one resulting in um, we had a great congressional candidate, a really strong progressive Democrat, good, um, a really great candidate. But we got sort of redistricted out of his district, and now um, we've got to mobilize around a guy that I'd never heard of before, and kind of came out of the woodwork a couple months ago, and that can be really disruptive. And as you said, also the changing demographics of Representative Bowman's district in particular. I don't know if this is going to be a trend or not, but it definitely means, we need to take a page maybe from Michigan's book. Michigan's been kind of on a roll with beating right to work, protecting reproductive rights, but it all started with changing how elections were conducted, how the redistricting process was conducted. So those kind of fundamental reforms are important. But always we need broad electoral coalitions, and we need just continuous mobilization, I think, around issues.
Scott, a follow-up question. Broad electoral coalitions. In France, the broad left, and I emphasize broad, built a popular front. And they pushed back Le Pen, and the centrists came in third. Uh, are there parallels for the United States, in your opinion? Or is it a completely different electoral experience? What are the lessons there?
Well, it's hard to draw specific parallels again because we don't have this multi-party parliamentary system. But in fact, it was the centrists who came in second. So the New Popular Front got 182 seats in the legislature. The presidential coalition, which is kind of center right, got 168, and the National Rally, the far right fascist party, got 143. And they're trying to figure out what that means now in terms of forming a government. But I think the lesson is, one of our viewers wrote in, there's going to be work after the election no matter what. The election is not the end of this thing, because we have to keep the pressure on. For people that made promises during election season, we have to make sure they keep them. For people that, my representative, Mark Molinaro, is a MAGA Republican. He's horrible. We got to call them out, publicly show people what they are. Like, elections are not. I think there's this fantasy that the ruling class peddles, right? That elections are the only aspect of democracy, but we know that elections are just a kind of a time to bring to bear, apply the power that is built in the streets. So maybe that's the lesson. And also, the other lesson might be we see a certain section of the centrist coalition in France trying to reach out to the right for enough votes to form a new government, rather than reaching out to the New Popular Front, which won more seats than any other party in this race. So keeping in mind that the ruling class, there's no consistently democratic force within the ruling class. Even the liberal wing or what have you, they're not. They might be trying to beat Trump. They're not necessarily trying to advance democracy, and that's something we got to keep kind of at the front of our minds. Like, the anti-fascist coalition has to be a pro-democracy coalition in the sense of moving democracy forward, not just trying to preserve some status quo.
Aaron, another important development over the last couple of weeks has been the rulings by the Supreme Court. I mean, there were 3 or 4 rulings around impacting regulatory agencies and severely limiting their ability to protect people from bad commercial products and chemicals and drugs and so on and so forth. They're limiting the ability of the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate pollution and toxic waste and so on and so forth. That's one part of their ruling. And then on the other side, they decided to give a president immunity for any quote unquote official act that they might do. It could be overthrowing the government or carrying out an assassination against a political opponent. As long as, how are young people, in your view, uh, have you noticed among the organized sections of the young generation, what's the reaction been? Is there a greater sense of urgency about the election since the Supreme Court's decisions? Um, and what does that look like?
Yeah, Joe. So I think a lot of young people, ever since the Dobbs decision, have really come to the conclusion, right, that the court is kind of like the one of the main enemies of democracy in this country. And that's a really unfortunate thing, I think, for a lot of young people to realize, because we're seeing abortion rights be taken away. We're seeing the courts trying to take us back to this kind of like pre New Deal era, right? Where these corporate conglomerates, these monopolies, they get to do whatever they want. There's no any kind of democratic oversight that's able to actually say, here's kind of what our red line is. And so a lot of young people, I think, are becoming incredibly demobilized, quite honestly, because they're looking at these elections and they're looking at the organizing that they're doing, and this MAGA controlled court, right? This like unaccountable, unelected body of people are basically overturning democratic advance after the next. And so I think the challenge right now is to kind of like how you and Rosanna and Scott on this call have kind of been saying, this election is about so much more than just these two personalities. These two personalities represent an entire constellation of forces. And we need to be really serious about looking at the developments that have happened in France to really build that kind of anti-fascist unity that we need right now. And I see young people playing a very huge role in that effort, because there are young people who care a lot about democracy in this country. And there are young people who understand that we can't afford to check out of this election if we're serious about advancing the struggle for democracy. And so I think the challenge is kind of like teaching people, on the one hand, we do need to like be competing in elections, but on the other hand, right, we need to be out here in the streets. I think the challenge for young people and for bringing more young people into the anti-fascist movement, into the pro-democracy movement, is kind of convincing them that we need to do two things at the same time. We need to be getting involved in these elections and seriously contesting for like electoral power, but at the same time, we need to be trying to build our own independent movements in the streets, because we know that power doesn't concede anything without a fight. So we have to be prepared to fight.
Build our own independent movements in the streets, in the factories, on the campuses, keep our nose to the ground, build from the ground up, uh, organize, create structures and coalitions and financing that support those independent candidacies. And we have to run ourselves. We keep saying that, Rosanna, but one of the things that the National Committee is going to have to think about when it meets tomorrow is how next year we're going to put some meat on those bones that we've been rattling in the closets to ensure that um, uh, it actually happens, that we're able to take steps to run communist and left progressive candidates. We're going to have to organize some schools for candidates, and so that we understand the mechanisms for voter registration and voter education and so on and so forth. We've got to be in it to win it, and the party uh, has to stop talking about doing it and actually do it. Let's move to our mailbag discussion, if we might. We got an interesting one this morning. It says the left today, in this writer's opinion, is less class conscious and more identity conscious. And this manifests itself as saying that intersectionality is the primary framework from which to approach intellectual and political issues. And they say that leftists are putting racism and sexism and homophobia before the class struggle. Oh my goodness, no. Should the left be urged by communists and labor or agitators and others to focus around the economic roots instead of these identity politics issues? Put another way, should we focus on class and not identity struggles? Anybody want to take a shot at that?
I can take a shot at that
I,
question.
Okay, Aaron, you go first, and then Scott.
Yeah, Joe. So to be honest, this question really reminds me a lot about your remarks at our most recent convention, where you talked about, right, how there are a lot of people who say by focusing on racism, by focusing on sexism, by focusing on homophobia, that we're somehow dividing the class. And I think people who ask this question really need to stop and think about the level of consciousness that the class actually has, right? Trade union density in this country is at 10%. The working class isn't as organized as it needs to be to exercise its power as a class and to seriously throw down and make its weight felt in the political developments of this country. And so, because of that fact, I think we have to realize that the most serious way for us to start building our power as a class is by getting really involved in that struggle for democracy and understanding that we're not just trying to participate in the struggle for democracy, right? We're trying to lead that struggle because we know that there is no other more democratic force than the working class. And it's because of that fact that we have to build unity with oppressed nationalities and other oppressed groups. And this is also why I think it's important when we're getting questions like this that we have to make it very clear that there is a clear difference between intersectionality and the sort of understanding that oppressions can kind of overlap with each other. For instance, the idea of special exploitation, of special oppression, the idea of triple exploitation, of triple oppression that was put forward by Afro-Caribbean communist leader Claudia Jones, which is something that I think gets lost a lot in this conversation. There's a tendency to think intersectionality is the only way that this idea that there is a overlap between your race and overlap between your gender and overlap between your class. And I think taking those two ideas, the idea of triple oppression and intersectionality, and kind of saying those two things are the same, is incredibly misguided, I think, because you have this idea of triple oppression, which was created by a Afro immigrant working class woman who never even went to college. And you're kind of trying to say that theory, that idea, is the same as intersectionality, which is more of a legal theory that was created in the 1970s and the 1980s. It feels a little disrespectful, I think, to people like Claudia Jones and other communist theorists who have kind of come up since then, who have been frank about the fact that if we want to build the working class, if we want to build that class consciousness, we have to build democratic consciousness. And we have to get people to understand that winning the fight for democracy isn't a separate struggle from the class struggle. It's just one of the different ways in which the class struggle manifests.
Thank you, Aaron. Scott, you want to weigh in?
yeah. Two things, and I'll try to be brief. First, class is part of people's identity. The whole struggle of building class consciousness is getting people to feel their identity as members of the working class, an identity that brings them together with, across racial lines, across national lines, across lines of gender identity. Class is part of identity. So putting like class on one side and identity on the other is ridiculous. And we say an injury to one is an injury to all, and we take that very seriously. And that doesn't just mean an injury to one in terms of wages or job loss. It includes the injuries inflicted by white supremacy, the injuries inflicted by male supremacy and misogyny, by homophobia, by xenophobia, right? These are all things that attack, that harm our brothers and sisters in the working class, and we all have to fight them. An injury to one is an injury to all. It's a basic, like the basic heart of what we do. That's it.
Rosanna, have these people forgotten that the majority of workers in this country are women, and that you can't deal with class issues unless you deal with the issues of women workers and the special oppression that they face? Have they forgotten, Rosanna, that by 2030 or 2040, that the majority of people in this country, workers, will be workers of color, and that you won't be able to deal with working class issues unless you deal with issues of police violence and immigration and language issues and so on and so forth? What is this conception of class that some people seem to have?
Well, I think, it's once again, the battle of ideas and the stuff that you hear in separate issues and trying to separate the two. It's that whole process of not looking at the interconnection of everything and how it's linked together, and looking at things very separately, which, just you tend to just weave your web out there, and in some abyss, but in reality, everything is connected, and everything has to be dealt with in its content. And so, I think fully understanding how everything is connected is a key to under, understanding and answering this question.
Marx said it a long time ago. Labor in the white skin cannot be free so long as labor in the black skin is branded. And you can add the brown skin, the Native American skin, the Asian skin, the female skin, the multi-gendered skin, because all of these different forms of oppression, as Rosanna and Aaron and Scott have said, interpenetrate. Class is not a static, uh, uh, forgive me for saying it, white male category. It involves people of all different races and nationalities and genders and so on and so forth. And so we have to be able to understand and interpret and champion the interest of the entire class, and not just one particular section of it. You got to deal with economic issues, gender issues, racial issues, so on and so forth. Thank you very much for the question, viewer. We really enjoyed answering it, and I think that does it for Good Morning Revolution this week. We hope everybody will join us next week when maybe some of these issues around the presidential campaign will be solved. I doubt it, but maybe we will see. For us, we're not taking a position on what the Democrats do with their candidate. We're not taking a position on what the Republicans do with their candidate. We wish they would get one of them big hooks and pull them off the stage, but that's their business. We're going to keep our nose to the ground and continue organizing around the issues around Gaza, around police violence, around student debt, around women's abortion rights. We're going to continue to do voter registration, and we're going to do everything we can to promote working class interests and people's power in this election campaign. Thank you very much for viewing us. Until next week, stay strong, stay safe, and stay in the fight. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye bye.